In the 1980s, an African nation created one of the world's greatest architectural achievements, more impressive than the Eiffel Tower or the Burj Khalifa. But to this day, very few people talk about it. But when I show you what they built, you'll have no doubt about what is possible on the continent. I'm referring to the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace in the Ivory Coast. To say this structure is intimidating is an understatement. It is to this day the largest, most ornate church in the entire world. It dwarfs St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. People who see it in person are often left breathless, and they wonder to themselves, did Africans really build this? Yes, they did. The Lady of Peace was designed and manufactured by Africans in the 1980s in a collaboration between the president of the Ivory Coast and a local hotshot architect who wanted to show what Africa was capable of. The year is 1981, and the Ivory Coast is a young country that had only recently achieved independence a few decades prior. Like most African countries at the time, they struggled with the reputation of being a non-industrialized nation that Europeans thought couldn't survive without the support of their former colonial governments. This is where President Felix came up with a vision of building a church so spectacular and so grand that it would stand not only as a monument to piety, but a monument to the independent strength of the African people. I have to emphasize the audacity of what he was asking to build. President Felix wanted a church that was more ornate than Notre Dame, more imposing than the Hagia Sophia, and more grand than St. Peter's in Rome. And while all of those structures took a century to build, he wanted Africa's greatest church to be finished by the end of the decade. He scoured the world for an architect who could design such a structure on such an aggressive timeline. The great architects in Europe, America, and Asia all told him that his project and timeline were impossible. They said that Africa didn't have the infrastructure or the workforce necessary to complete the project, and they wouldn't sully their name by associating themselves with a sure failure. But then he looked local, and he met a young architect who was born in the Ivory Coast named Pierre Facari. This young upstart not only had the talent and experience to design the church, but most importantly, he had an unwavering belief in Africa's future. His ethnic background was Lebanese, he was raised in Africa, and he was trained as an architect in Europe, which gave him a unique perspective on architectural design. Once he was selected by President Felix, he locked himself in his office and worked tirelessly, 12 hours a day with no weekends or holidays until the blueprints were perfect. Within a year, Pierre emerged from his office with a design that took inspiration from the Vatican, from the East Roman Empire, and from West Africa. This took the form of a church that was so large it could accommodate nearly 20,000 people for Mass, and it could host national events with over 150,000 people. President Felix could not have been more impressed with his decision to hire Pierre. But building it was the real challenge. They chose Yamoussoukro for the construction site and spent the next year training thousands of skilled workers to engage in the project. They also needed to build roads and factories to supply the materials for constructions, roads and factories that exist to this day. And despite all the naysayers who thought such an ambitious project being run by Africans would fail, by the end of the decade, the church was complete. And it was more spectacular than even President Felix envisioned. In my opinion, not even Solomon's temple could have rivaled it. The size almost can't be comprehended right away. It's 158 meters tall, but unlike a skyscraper, which is narrow, the church is 150 meters in diameter. Anyone in construction would know how unbelievably complicated creating a structure that is both tall and wide is. I don't mean this as any disrespect to the designers of the Burj Khalifa, but what the Ivory Coast built is a far greater architectural achievement. In a way, I'd say the Church of Peace isn't just a monument to African ingenuity, but a testament to what humanity in general is capable of when the people are united and properly motivated. I believe everyone should plan a trip to Yamoussoukro. This is just my opinion, but I found it to be the most beautiful building I have ever seen. And I wonder if that is a reason why we don't hear the media talking about the Church of Peace. A consistent theme when reporting in Africa seems to be to downplay the accomplishments of the Africans and to amplify the problems. Maybe the regular Western person would view Africa differently if they were given the full picture of what Africans have accomplished. If the Africans in the 1980s were able to create one of the greatest structures in the history of the world, what would the continent be capable of if we cut out the financial parasites that cripple many African countries today? But I want to know what you think. Have you ever visited the Church of Peace in the Ivory Coast? Is it an overstatement when I say it's more beautiful than Notre Dame or the Eiffel Tower? And is it worth it for countries to build these types of spectacular monuments as opposed to building something more practical like residential buildings? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if this video provided value to you, give me a like and a follow. That really helps out my channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.